The blood on Lila Montgomery's hands had long since dried by the time the stranger rode into Colorado City that scorching August afternoon in 1878. But she could still feel its phantom warmth as she scrubbed the wooden floor of her modest home on the edge of town. Her husband had been dead 3 months now, shot down by cattle rustlers while defending the small herd that had been their family's only source of income, and the weight of widowhood sat heavy on her 24-year-old shoulders. She had 4 children to feed, clothe, and raise in a world that showed little mercy to women alone, and some days the enormity of that responsibility threatened to crush her completely. "Mama, Samuel is throwing rocks at the chickens again," called Emma, her eldest at 9 years old, from the doorway. The girl had her father's serious brown eyes and a maturity that made Lila's heart ache with equal parts pride and sorrow. No child should have to grow up so fast. Lila pushed a strand of dark blonde hair from her face and set down her scrub brush. "Samuel Montgomery, you get yourself in this house right this minute," she called out, her voice carrying the particular edge that mothers develop when their patience has worn thin. At 7 years old, Samuel had been the one most affected by his father's death, acting out in ways that both worried and exhausted her. The boy appeared in the doorway, dirt smudged across his freckled cheeks, defiance burning in eyes that were mirror images of her own pale blue. "I was just trying to make them move. They were in my way." "In your way to where exactly? You have chores that need doing, young man. The water barrel needs filling, and I asked you to check the fence line behind the house this morning." Lila tried to keep the weariness from her voice, but it crept in anyway. Every day felt like a battle she was slowly losing. Behind Samuel, she could see little Margaret, just turned 5, playing with corn husk dolls on the porch, her blonde curls catching the sunlight. And somewhere inside, probably napping despite the heat, was Thomas, barely 2 years old and still asking for his papa every night before bed. 4 children, 4 souls depending entirely on her. The sound of hoofbeats on the dusty road made them all turn. Strangers were not uncommon in Colorado City, situated as it was along one of the main routes through the territory, but something about this rider made Lila instinctively step closer to her children. The man sat tall in his saddle, broad-shouldered, and wearing the weathered clothing of someone who had spent considerable time on the trail. As he drew closer, she could make out a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of dark stubble, and eyes that, even at this distance, seemed to take in everything around him with careful assessment. He slowed his horse to a walk as he approached their property, then stopped entirely when he reached their fence. "Afternoon, madam," he called out, his voice deep and courteous. He removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that fell just past his collar. "Name is Harrison Zimmerman. I am looking for work, and I heard in town that you might need a hand with your property." Lila felt her spine stiffen. She had mentioned to Mrs. Crawford at the general store just yesterday that she was struggling to manage the land on her own, but she had not expected word to spread so quickly, nor had she seriously entertained the idea of hiring help. How could she afford to pay anyone when she could barely afford to feed her own family? "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Zimmerman, but I am afraid you heard wrong. I have no work to offer." She kept her voice polite but firm, the way she had learned to speak to men who might mistake kindness for invitation. Harrison Zimmerman did not immediately ride away as she expected. Instead, he studied the property with what seemed like genuine interest, his gaze moving from the sagging fence to the overgrown vegetable garden to the barn that was missing several boards. "Seems to me you have got plenty of work that needs doing. Question is whether you have got the means to pay for it." The directness of his statement caught her off guard, Most men would have danced around the subject of her obvious poverty. Then you have your answer, Mr. Zimmerman. I am sure there are plenty of other ranches in the area that could use an experienced hand and actually pay you for your trouble. Probably so, he agreed, but still he made no move to leave. His eyes, she noticed now, were a striking hazel color, green and brown and gold all mixed together. They settled on her children with an expression she could not quite read. "How old are your young ones?" The question felt too personal, too presumptuous, but something in his tone was not threatening. Emma had moved closer to her mother, protective instincts already developing, while Samuel stood his ground with the false bravado of a boy trying to be the man of the house. Margaret peeked around the porch post, curious about the stranger. "That is hardly your concern, Mr. Zimmerman." Lila crossed her arms over her chest, suddenly aware of how worn her dress was, how indelicate she must look after a morning of hard labor. He nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he already suspected. "You are right, madam. I apologize for the intrusion. But before I go, would you mind if I watered my horse? It has been a long ride from Denver and we are both pretty parched. It would have been cruel to refuse such a simple request, especially in this heat." Lila gestured toward the water trough near the barn. "Of course, help yourself." Harrison dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. He was tall, well over 6 feet, but moved with a careful deliberateness that suggested strength kept under tight control. As he led his horse to the trough, Samuel suddenly darted forward. "That is a fine-looking horse, mister," the boy said, his earlier sullenness replaced by obvious admiration. "What is his name?" "This old fellow is called Ranger," Harrison replied, running a hand along the chestnut gelding's neck. "Had him for about 5 years now. Best trail partner a man could ask for." "My papa had a horse named Scout," Samuel said, his voice taking on a wistful quality. "But Mama had to sell him after Papa died. She said we needed the money for food." Lila felt heat rise to her cheeks, embarrassed by the revelation of their circumstances to this stranger, but Harrison Zimmerman did not look at her with pity. Instead, he crouched down to Samuel's level, bringing himself eye to eye with the boy. "I am real sorry about your papa, son. Losing someone you love is about the hardest thing there is." There was something in his voice that suggested personal experience with grief. "But your mama made the right choice, taking care of you and your sisters and brother first. That is what good parents do." Samuel seemed to consider this, then nodded solemnly. "I am the man of the house now. I am supposed to take care of everyone, but I do not always know how." Harrison glanced up at Lila, and in that brief exchange of looks she felt something shift. This was not a man looking to take advantage of a desperate widow. This was someone who genuinely understood the weight her family was carrying. Being the man of the house is not about knowing how to do everything right away, Harrison said gently. It is about learning and helping where you can and letting other people help you too. Takes a strong man to accept help when it is offered. "Samuel, come back here and let Mr. Zimmerman water his horse in peace," Lila called, uncomfortable with the intimacy of the conversation. But as her son reluctantly returned to her side, she found herself asking, "What sort of work do you normally do, Mr. Zimmerman?" He straightened, his considerable height making her feel small despite her own above-average stature for a woman. "I've worked cattle ranches mostly, up in Wyoming and Montana. Done some work as a trail guide, a little bit of everything really. Lost my last position when the ranch I was working for got sold to a big outfit out of Texas. They brought in their own crew." "And you came all the way to Colorado looking for work?" She tried to keep the skepticism from her voice. "I came to Colorado because I was ready for a change," he said simply. Spent the last 10 years drifting from one job to another, never putting down roots anywhere. Figured it was time to find a place worth staying for. Colorado City is hardly the most promising place for a man with your experience. The big ranches are all farther south and west. Lila did not know why she was prolonging this conversation when she should have been sending him on his way. Maybe I am not looking for a big ranch. Harrison's gaze moved across her property again, but this time she saw it through different eyes. Where she saw failure and decay, perhaps he saw potential. A place like this, with some work and attention, could be something real special. Close enough to town for convenience, good water source from that creek I passed, decent grazing land. Just need someone to put in the effort. Effort does not pay for lumber to fix the barn or seed for next spring's planting, Lila said, hating how defeated she sounded. I appreciate your optimism, Mr. Zimmerman, but I live in the real world, and in the real world I cannot afford to hire you or anyone else. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. Finally, he said, "What if I worked for room and board? Just until you get back on your feet. I can see you have got space in the barn for me to sleep, and I am not a particularly picky eater. In exchange, I will fix what needs fixing, tend what needs tending, and help you turn this place into something productive again." Lila stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You want to work for just food and a place to sleep? That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. What man would agree to such an arrangement? A man who understands that some things are more valuable than money," Harrison replied evenly. "A man who would rather build something worthwhile than chase the next paycheck. And maybe a man who has spent too many years alone and would not mind being around a family for a while." He glanced at her children again, and something in his expression softened. "I always thought I wanted a large family someday, just never got around to having one of my own." The statement hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Lila was not ready to examine. This was madness. She did not know this man from Adam, and here he was proposing to essentially move onto her property in exchange for what amounted to almost nothing. It was either the most generous offer she had ever received or an elaborate scheme she was too exhausted to see through. "Mama, please say yes," Emma whispered, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "We need help, and he seems nice." "Emma, hush. This is not a decision for children to make." But even as Lila said it, she knew her daughter was right. They did need help desperately, and this Harrison Zimmerman did seem genuine, though she had been fooled by seeming before. "I understand your hesitation, Mrs. Montgomery," Harrison said, having clearly picked up her name from Samuel's earlier conversation. "You do not know me, and you have got children to protect. How about this? I will work today from now until sundown, fixing whatever you think is most urgent. You can watch me, see how I work, decide if I am trustworthy. If you want me gone by nightfall, I will go with no argument. But if you decide I can stay, we will figure out the details then. Fair enough." It was more than fair. It was extraordinarily generous, and that worried her almost as much as it tempted her. "Why are you really doing this, Mr. Zimmerman? And do not tell me it is because you want to be around a family. No man gives up paying work for charity." His jaw tightened slightly, the first sign of real emotion breaking through his calm exterior. "My younger sister died 2 years back, leaving behind 3 children. Their father had already run off, so they ended up in an orphanage back in St. Louis. I was working a cattle drive in Montana when it happened, did not even hear about it until months later. By the time I got there to claim them, they had already been separated, sent to different families. I have spent the better part of the last year trying to track them down with no luck." He looked directly at her, and she could see the pain in his eyes was genuine. I could not save my sister's children, Mrs. Montgomery, but maybe I can help make sure another family does not fall apart when they have got a fighting chance to stay together." The raw honesty in his words hit Lila like a physical blow. She recognized the particular grief of helplessness, the weight of failing to protect the people you loved. "I am sorry about your sister and your nieces and nephews. That is a terrible thing to carry." "It is what it is," Harrison said quietly. "But I am tired of running from it. I want to do something that matters, even if it is just helping one family keep their heads above water. So what do you say, Mrs. Montgomery? Will you let me prove I can be useful?" Lila looked at her children, then at her dilapidated property, then back at this stranger, who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere with an offer that was either too good to be true or exactly what they needed. Every instinct screamed at her to be cautious, but a deeper voice whispered that sometimes you had to take a leap of faith. "The fence," she heard herself say. "The entire perimeter needs to be reinforced and repaired. Tools are in the barn. We will provide lunch and supper, but nothing more until I decide what is what." A smile broke across Harrison Zimmerman's face, transforming him from merely handsome to something that made Lila's breath catch unexpectedly in her throat. "Yes, madam. You will not regret this, I promise you that." As he headed toward the barn to assess the tools and materials available, Lila wondered if she had just made the best decision of her life or the worst. Only time would tell, but for the first time since her husband's death, she felt a small flutter of something that might have been hope. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Harrison worked his way around the property line, pulling out rotted fence posts and replacing them with new wood he found stored in the back of the barn. Lila tried to focus on her own tasks, supervising the children and preparing their meager midday meal, but she found her eyes drawn repeatedly to the man working her land. He moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this kind of labor countless times before, but there was no sense of boredom or resentment in his movements. Instead, he seemed almost content, occasionally pausing to wipe sweat from his brow or take a drink from the canteen he had brought with him. When Samuel wandered over to watch, Harrison did not shoo him away, but instead showed the boy how to properly set a fence post, explaining the process with patient detail. "You want it deep enough that it will not work loose when the cattle lean on it," Harrison was saying as Lila approached with a jar of cool water from the well. "About 2 feet down, packed tight with rocks and soil. See how we tamp it down? That is what makes it stable." Samuel hung on every word, his young face serious with concentration. "Can I try the next one?" "Sure can if your mama says it is all right." Harrison looked up at Lila, his face streaked with honest sweat and dirt. "Boy has got good instincts, catches on quick." "You do not have to entertain my children, Mr. Zimmerman. I am sure they are distracting you from your work." Lila handed him the water jar, careful not to let their fingers touch. "I do not mind at all, madam. Actually makes the work go faster, having company." He drank deeply, and Lila found herself watching the line of his throat, the strength evident in his shoulders and arms. She looked away quickly, embarrassed by her own observation. "Samuel, come help me with the washing," she said abruptly. "Mr. Zimmerman has enough to do without you slowing him down." The boy's face fell, but he obeyed without argument, trudging back toward the house with obvious reluctance. Harrison watched him go, then turned back to Lila. "He is a good kid. They all seem like good kids." "They are the best thing in my life," Lila said simply. "Everything I do for them. Your husband was a lucky man." The words were spoken quietly, without any undertone of impropriety, but they still made Lila's chest tighten. "My husband was a good man who died trying to protect what was ours," she said, hearing the defensive edge in her voice. "He did not deserve what happened to him. "No, madam, I am sure he did not. I did not mean any disrespect." Harrison's expression was genuinely apologetic. "Just meant that any man would be blessed to have a family like yours, is all." Lila nodded stiffly and turned back toward the house, her emotions in turmoil. She had not thought about herself as a woman in months, had not allowed herself to feel anything beyond exhaustion and fear and determination. But something about Harrison Zimmerman's presence was awakening parts of her she had thought permanently dormant, and it frightened her more than she wanted to admit. The afternoon wore on, the heat intensifying until even the birds seemed too exhausted to sing. Lila worked in the garden, pulling weeds and trying to salvage what vegetables had survived her recent neglect, while Emma watched the younger children. Through it all, she remained acutely aware of Harrison's presence, the steady rhythm of his work creating a strange sense of normalcy she had not felt since before her husband's death. When she finally called everyone in for supper, Harrison had completed nearly a third of the fence perimeter, an impressive feat considering the condition it had been in. He cleaned up at the pump outside, washing the worst of the dirt from his hands and face, then hesitated at the door. "I appreciate the invite, Mrs. Montgomery, but I can eat outside if you would prefer. Do not want to make you uncomfortable in your own home." It was a considerate offer, and Lila was tempted to accept it, to maintain some boundary between this stranger and her family. But the children were already setting the table, and Emma had put out 6 plates without being told. She had raised them to be hospitable, and turning him away now would confuse them. "You have worked hard all afternoon in this heat, Mr. Zimmerman. The least I can do is offer you a seat at our table." She stepped aside to let him enter, very aware of how small her home suddenly seemed with his large frame inside it. The meal was simple, just beans and cornbread with some preserved vegetables from last year's harvest, but Harrison ate with genuine appreciation, complimenting her cooking in a way that seemed sincere rather than flattering. The children peppered him with questions throughout the meal, and Lila found herself learning things about their guest almost against her will. He was 28 years old, had been on his own since he was 16 when his parents died in a house fire. He had worked ranches all across the Western Territories, saved a man from drowning in the Snake River, once saw a grizzly bear up close in Montana, and had a particular fondness for apple pie, which he had not tasted in over a year. "Maybe Mama will make you one," Margaret said with the innocent optimism of a 5-year-old. "She makes the best pies in the whole world." "I am sure she does," Harrison agreed, his eyes meeting Lila's across the table. "But pie requires ingredients and effort, and your mama has got enough demands on both already. I am plenty happy with beans and cornbread." "When Papa was alive, Mama used to bake all the time," Emma said quietly, "but we do not have money for sugar and such anymore." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of their reduced circumstances. Lila felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, though she had nothing to be ashamed of. Poverty was not a moral failing, just a harsh reality. "Your mama is doing an incredible job taking care of all of you," Harrison said firmly, looking at each child in turn. "Do you know how hard it is to keep a household running, especially on your own? She is making sure you are fed, clothed, safe, and loved. That is more important than any pie ever baked." "But I miss pie," Thomas piped up, speaking for the first time since Harrison had arrived. His cherubic face was utterly serious. "And I miss Papa." The little boy's statement broke something open in the room. Samuel looked down at his plate, blinking hard. Emma reached over to squeeze her baby brother's hand. Margaret's lower lip trembled, and Lila felt the familiar sting of tears she could not afford to shed. Harrison cleared his throat roughly. "I miss people too, Thomas." Missing people we love is just part of life sometimes. But you know what helps? Being grateful for the people we still have. You have got your mama, your sisters, and your brother. That is a pretty special thing. Thomas considered this with the gravity only small children could muster, then nodded slowly. And now we have you too. Thomas, Mr. Zimmerman is just here for today, Lila corrected gently, though the words felt like a lie even as she spoke them. He has not decided if he is staying yet, and neither have I. 4 pairs of eyes turned to her, hopeful and pleading. Even baby Thomas seemed to understand what was at stake. But it was Harrison's expression that truly captured her attention, open and vulnerable in a way she had not expected from a man who clearly kept his emotions carefully guarded. "I would like to stay," he said quietly, "if you will have me. I know it is unconventional, and I know you have got every reason to be cautious. But I give you my word, Mrs. Montgomery, I am here to help, nothing more. You set the boundaries, you make the rules, and I will abide by them. All I ask is the chance to prove I can make a difference for you and your children." Lila looked at this stranger who was no longer quite so strange. This man who had worked himself to exhaustion in her fields without complaint, who had treated her children with kindness and respect, who had shared pieces of his own grief, as if he understood that vulnerability could be a gift rather than a weakness. Every practical bone in her body screamed that this was reckless, that she knew nothing about him beyond what he had chosen to reveal, that inviting him to stay was inviting trouble. But her heart, which had been locked away in protective ice since her husband's death, whispered something different. It whispered that sometimes angels appeared in unexpected forms, that sometimes help came from the most unlikely sources, and that maybe, just maybe, she did not have to carry this burden entirely alone. "You can stay," she heard herself say, and 4 children erupted in cheers while Harrison Zimmerman smiled at her with an expression that made her feel seen in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. "But we need to establish some ground rules. You sleep in the barn, you take your meals with us, and you work as you see fit on improving the property. In exchange, I will do your washing and mending and provide 3 meals a day. This is a business arrangement, Mr. Zimmerman, nothing more. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, madam. And I appreciate your trust more than you know." Harrison stood, gathering his plate and cup. "I will get settled in the barn and be out of your way for the evening. Thank you for the meal and the opportunity." As he stepped out into the gathering dusk, Lila watched through the window, wondering what she had just set in motion. Beside her, Emma tugged at her sleeve. "He is a good man, Mama, I can tell." "I hope you are right, sweetheart," Lila murmured, though she was not entirely sure what she was hoping for. Safety for her children, certainly. Help with the overwhelming work of maintaining the property, absolutely. But beneath those practical concerns lurked something else. Something that felt dangerously like the first fragile stirrings of hope for a future that might hold more than mere survival. The first week of Harrison's presence passed in a blur of activity and adjustment. He rose with the sun each morning and worked until well after dark, tackling projects Lila had thought impossible. The fence was completed and reinforced. The barn roof was patched and weatherproofed. The vegetable garden was weeded, expanded, and properly irrigated with a clever system of channels he dug from the nearby creek. He worked with the focused intensity of someone trying to outrun his own thoughts. But he was never too busy to answer Samuel's endless questions, or let Margaret trail after him like a devoted shadow. Emma he treated with particular respect, seeming to understand that she had been forced to grow up too quickly and deserved to have her maturity acknowledged. And with Thomas, he showed a gentle patience that made Lila's throat tight with emotions she did not want to name. For her part, Lila maintained the boundaries she had established, treating Harrison with polite courtesy but nothing more. She cooked his meals, washed his clothes, and tolerated his presence at her table, but she kept a careful emotional distance, reminding herself daily that this arrangement was temporary, practical, nothing more. Yet she could not help but notice things about him. The way he favored his left leg slightly in the mornings, as if an old injury troubled him. The fact that he never took a second helping of food, no matter how hungry he might be, until he was certain everyone else had eaten their fill. How he sometimes stared off into the distance with an expression of such profound sadness that she wanted to ask what memories haunted him. Though she never did. On the 8th day of his residence, Lila was hanging laundry when she heard raised voices from behind the barn. She hurried around the corner to find Samuel and Harrison in what appeared to be a heated discussion. "I am not a baby," Samuel was saying, his voice cracking with emotion. "I can handle a gun. Papa was teaching me before he died." "I am sure he was, son, but that does not mean you are ready to go hunting on your own," Harrison replied, his tone patient but firm. "There is a difference between learning to shoot and being responsible for a weapon in the wilderness. You are 7 years old." "Almost 8, Samuel shot back. "And we need meat. Mama will not say it, but I know we are running low on everything. If I could bring home a deer or even some rabbits, it would help." Lila's heart clenched at her son's words, at the burden he had placed on his own small shoulders. She was about to intervene when Harrison spoke again. "You are right that your family could use fresh meat, and you are right that you are old enough to start learning proper hunting skills. But you are not going alone, Samuel. How about this tomorrow, if your mama approves, you and I go out together? I will teach you how to track, how to move quietly, how to make a clean kill, and if we are successful, we will bring something back for your family. Deal?" Samuel's entire demeanor changed, suspicion melting into eager excitement. "Really? You would take me hunting?" "If your mama says yes, absolutely. But Samuel, you have to understand something. Hunting is not about proving you are a man. It is about providing for people you care about and respecting the life you take in the process. Can you approach it with that kind of seriousness?" The boy nodded solemnly. "I can. I promise." They shook hands, and Lila found herself blinking back unexpected tears. Her husband would have had this conversation with Samuel eventually, would have taken him on his first real hunting trip and taught him these lessons. The fact that Harrison was willing to step into that role, even temporarily, touched something deep inside her. She stepped around the corner, making her presence known. "I could not help but overhear. Samuel, go check on your sisters, please. I need to speak with Mr. Zimmerman." Samuel scampered off, and Harrison turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. "I apologize if I overstepped, Mrs. Montgomery. I should have spoken to you first before making promises to your son." "You should have," Lila agreed. "But I appreciate that you did not dismiss his concerns or make him feel childish for wanting to help. That was kindly done." "He is carrying a heavy load for such young shoulders," Harrison observed. "Trying to be the man his papa was, not understanding that he is still allowed to be a boy." "I know. I see it every day and it breaks my heart, but I do not know how to fix it." "How do I tell him? He does not have to take care of us when the truth is we barely managing as it is." The admission escaped before Lila could stop it, revealing more vulnerability than she had intended. Harrison studied her for a long moment, and she resisted the urge to look away from the intensity of his gaze. "You tell him by letting other people help. You tell him by showing him that accepting assistance is not weakness but wisdom. You tell him by not trying to carry everything yourself." "Is that what you think I am doing? Carrying everything myself?" Lila felt defensive, though she knew he was right. "I think you are doing what you have to do to survive," Harrison said gently. "But survival and living are not the same thing, Mrs. Montgomery. You and your children deserve more than just getting by day to day. And what would you suggest, Mr. Zimmerman? Should I simply trust that everything will work out, that help will always appear when I need it?" She heard the bitterness in her voice but could not contain it. "My husband trusted that our cattle would be safe, that the law would protect us, that good men would prevail over bad ones. And where did that trust get him? A grave on the hill and a family left destitute." Harrison's expression softened with compassion. "I am not suggesting you trust blindly, madam. I am suggesting you let yourself believe that good things are still possible, that not every man is a threat, not every offer has strings attached, not every bit of kindness is a prelude to betrayal." "How can you be so certain?" Lila whispered, feeling the walls she had built around her heart trembling. "How do you trust anything in a world that takes away everything you love?" "I do not know that I am certain about anything," Harrison admitted, "but I know that closing yourself off completely is just another kind of death. Your husband died, Mrs. Montgomery, but you did not. You are still here, still fighting, still loving those children with everything you have. That takes courage. What takes even more courage is letting yourself hope again." Lila felt tears spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. Months of pent-up grief and fear and exhaustion pouring out in great wrenching sobs. She tried to turn away, mortified by her loss of control, but Harrison stepped closer, not touching her but simply being present, offering the silent solidarity of someone who understood grief intimately. "I am sorry," she gasped when she could finally speak again. "I do not know what came over me. I never cry, I cannot afford to cry. Everyone needs to cry sometimes, madam, even the strongest people in the world, maybe especially them." Harrison pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her. "Your secret is safe with me." Lila took the cloth and wiped her face, feeling simultaneously embarrassed and oddly relieved, as if some poison had been lanced from a wound she had not known was festering. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman, for your discretion and your kindness." "Harrison," he said quietly, "I have been living on your property for over a week now, eating at your table, playing with your children. I think we can dispense with the formalities, do not you? Please call me Harrison." It felt like a significant step, moving from the safety of surnames to the intimacy of given names. But Lila found herself nodding. "Only if you call me Lila. Mrs. Montgomery makes me feel like a dried-up old woman." "You are many things, Lila, but dried up and old are not among them," Harrison said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up sharply. His eyes held an expression she had not seen directed at her in a very long time, one that made her intensely aware of herself as a woman, not just a mother and widow. She took a step back, needing distance from whatever was building between them. "About the hunting trip with Samuel. You have my permission, but please be careful. He is all bravado and very little experience. I could not bear it if something happened to him." "I will guard him with my life," Harrison promised, and Lila believed him absolutely. "We will stick to small game, nothing dangerous, and I will not let him out of my sight for a moment." "Thank you. He needs this, needs to feel capable and useful. Just bring him home safe." "Always," Harrison said, and the weight of that single word felt like a vow that extended far beyond a single hunting trip. The next morning, Lila packed food for Harrison and Samuel, watching with mixed emotions as her son prepared for his first real hunting expedition. He was vibrating with excitement, checking and rechecking the supplies Harrison had helped him gather. "Remember what we talked about," Harrison said as they prepared to leave. "Stay close, stay quiet, and listen to instructions. This is not a game, Samuel. Understood?" "Understood," Samuel replied seriously. though his eyes shone with barely contained joy. They set off into the foothills beyond the property, and Lila tried to focus on her regular tasks, on keeping the younger children occupied and not worrying herself sick. Emma seemed to sense her mother's anxiety and stepped in with unusual attentiveness, entertaining Margaret and Thomas with games and stories. "They will be fine, Mama," Emma said during the midday meal. "Mr. Zimmerman knows what he is doing, and he would never let anything happen to Samuel." "How can you be so sure?" Lila asked, not entirely rhetorically. Emma considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. "Because he looks at us the way Papa used to, like we matter to him, like he would do anything to keep us safe." The observation from her 9-year-old daughter was so astute that Lila did not know how to respond. Instead, she simply hugged Emma close and tried not to think about what it might mean that Harrison Zimmerman had already become important enough to her children that they were drawing comparisons to their father. The afternoon dragged on interminably. Lila found herself pausing in her work to stare toward the hills, straining for any sign of returning figures. When the sun began its descent toward the horizon, her worry escalated into genuine fear. What if something had happened? What if Samuel had been injured, or they had gotten lost, or encountered a bear or mountain lion? Just as panic was truly setting in, she spotted them cresting the ridge, two silhouettes against the orange sky. As they drew closer, she could see that Samuel was carrying something, his posture proud and triumphant. Harrison walked beside him, matching his pace, one hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder. "Mama, Mama, look," Samuel called as soon as they were within earshot. "I got 2 rabbits all by myself. Well, Harrison helped me track them and told me when to shoot, but I am the one who pulled the trigger and made the kill." Lila examined the rabbits, which were indeed cleanly killed, then looked at her son's face, glowing with achievement. "I am very proud of you, Samuel. These will make a fine stew for tomorrow." "Harrison said I did real good for my first time," Samuel continued, barely able to contain himself. "He said I have got good instincts and steady hands, and he taught me how to field dress them and everything." "It was amazing, Mama. Can we go again soon? Let us see how you manage your regular chores before we start planning more hunting trips," Lila said, but she could not help smiling at his enthusiasm. This was the most animated and genuinely happy she had seen Samuel since his father's death. As Samuel ran off to show his sisters his prizes, Lila turned to Harrison. "Thank you for taking him. It clearly meant the world to him." "He is a natural," Harrison said warmly. "Patient, observant, respectful of the process. You should be proud. You and your husband raised him right." "My husband raised him," Lila corrected softly. "I am just trying not to ruin what Thomas built. You are doing more than that, and you know it." Harrison's voice was gentle but firm. "Those children are kind, respectful, hardworking, and loving because of you, Lila. Because you have shown them how to be those things even in the face of terrible loss. That is not just maintaining what your husband started. That is building something even stronger." The use of her given name still sent a little thrill through her, one she tried to ignore. "You are generous with your compliments, Harrison." "I am honest with my observations," he replied. "There is a difference." They stood there in the fading light, and Lila felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. She should go inside, should put distance between herself and this man who was becoming far too important far too quickly. But she found herself rooted to the spot. "Lila, I need to tell you something," Harrison said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "I ran into some men in town last week when I went for supplies. They were asking about your property, about whether you might be interested in selling." Alarm shot through her. "What men? What did you tell them?" "I did not tell them anything, said it was not my place." "But they seemed to know your situation pretty well. knew you were struggling financially. One of them, fellow named Garrett, suggested they might make you an offer, something that would give you enough money to relocate somewhere easier for a woman on her own. Cyrus Garrett, Lila said bitterly. He has been circling like a vulture since Thomas died. He owns the big ranch south of here and has wanted our water access for years. He has made several offers, each one more insulting than the last. I got the impression he was not planning to take no for an answer much longer, Harrison said carefully. I thought you should know he is getting more aggressive about it. Lila felt cold despite the warm evening. What can he do? The land is mine legally. My husband made sure of that before he died, got all the papers filed properly in Denver. Legal ownership and practical possession are not always the same thing, especially for a woman alone. Harrison's expression was troubled. I am not trying to frighten you, Lila, but men like Garrett have ways of getting what they want, ways that do not always respect the law. Are you suggesting he would try to force me off my own land? The idea was terrifying but not entirely implausible. She had heard stories of similar situations, of widows and orphans pressured or intimidated into selling at a fraction of fair value. I am suggesting you should be careful and aware, Harrison said, and that you should not face this alone. Whatever Garrett is planning, he is less likely to try anything with a man present on the property. The implication was clear. Harrison was not just here to fix fences and teach her son to hunt. He was becoming a protector, a buffer between her vulnerable family and the predatory elements that saw her widowhood as an opportunity. Is that why you really stayed? Lila asked quietly. Because you thought I needed protection. Harrison met her eyes directly. I stayed because I wanted to help a family in need. The fact that you also might need someone watching your back is just additional motivation to make sure I do not let you down. I did not ask you to fight my battles, Harrison. She kept her voice level, though emotions churned inside her. No, you did not ask, but I am offering anyway. Not because I think you are weak or incapable, but because sometimes having an ally makes all the difference. And because, he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. Because why? Lila prompted, though part of her feared the answer. Because I have come to care about what happens to you and your children, Harrison said simply. More than I probably should, given that I have only been here a couple of weeks, but there it is. You matter to me, Lila. All of you matter to me. The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable and impossible to ignore. Lila's heart hammered in her chest as she processed what he was saying, what it might mean for the careful distance she had been trying to maintain. Harrison, I cannot. She struggled to find words for the tangle of feelings inside her. It is too soon, too complicated. I am not ready for anything beyond what we already have. I know, he said gently. And I am not asking for anything more. I am just being honest about where I stand. You set the pace, Lila. You set the boundaries. I am just here for as long as you will have me, offering whatever help you will accept. Why? The question burst from her with more force than she intended. Why would you tie yourself to someone else's struggling family, someone else's problems? You could work anywhere for actual money, building a life of your own. Why stay here? Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. After my sister died and I could not find her children, I felt like I had failed the only family I had left. I have been drifting ever since, working jobs that did not mean anything, sleeping in places that were not home, living a life that added up to nothing important. Then I rode into this town and saw you scrubbing blood from your floorboards with 4 children playing nearby, and something just clicked into place. This is where I am supposed to be. These are the people I am supposed to help. It is not about duty or charity, Lila. It is about finally finding something worth staying for. Lila felt tears welling up again, overwhelmed by the raw honesty of his words. You barely know us. Sometimes you do not need years to recognize what is important, Harrison replied. Sometimes you just know. Before Lila could respond, Margaret came running around the corner of the house. Mama, Mama, Thomas spilled the milk everywhere and Emma is trying to clean it up, but it is getting all sticky. The mundane crisis broke the intensity of the moment, and Lila seized on it gratefully. I had better go deal with that. Thank you again for taking Samuel today. She hurried toward the house, needing distance from Harrison Zimmerman and the impossible feelings he was stirring up inside her. But even as she mopped up spilled milk and settled her children for the evening, she could not stop thinking about what he had said, about the way he looked at her, about the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, her heart was ready to feel something again. That night, after the children were asleep, Lila sat on her porch in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the Colorado night. From the barn, she could see the faint glow of Harrison's lantern, and she wondered what he was thinking about, whether he was regretting his confession or simply settling in for the night. She thought about her husband, about the love they had shared, about the life they had built together before it was stolen away. Thomas had been a good man, solid and dependable, if not particularly demonstrative with his affections. Their marriage had been built on mutual respect and shared goals more than passionate romance, and she had been content with that. But Harrison made her feel things she had never felt before, an intensity of awareness that was both thrilling and terrifying. When he looked at her, she felt truly seen. When he spoke to her, she felt heard in a way that went beyond mere words. And when he was near, she felt a pull toward him that defied all logic and propriety. It was too soon, too complicated, too dangerous to risk opening her heart when she had so many other responsibilities, so many other people depending on her. And yet, as she sat there in the darkness, Lila could not deny the truth that was growing more undeniable every day. She was falling in love with Harrison Zimmerman, and she had no idea what to do about it. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost dangerously normal. Harrison continued his work on the property, completing projects with efficiency and skill. He built a proper chicken coop to replace the ramshackle one that had been barely standing. He repaired the plow and broke ground for expanded crops come spring. He even constructed a new front porch, sturdy and level, where the children could play without worrying about rotting boards. But it was not just the physical improvements that changed the atmosphere of the property. It was the way the children blossomed under Harrison's steady presence. Samuel grew more confident and less angry, his energy channeled into learning skills rather than acting out. Emma relaxed into being a child again, sometimes even giggling and playing instead of constantly trying to be a little mother. Margaret followed Harrison everywhere, chattering constantly, and he listened to her childish observations with genuine interest. Even Thomas came to accept this new man in their lives, occasionally reaching for Harrison when he wanted to be picked up or carried. For Lila, watching her children heal was both wonderful and painful. She was grateful for Harrison's positive influence, but she could not help but feel a pang of concern. What would happen when he eventually left? And he would leave eventually, would not he? Men like Harrison Zimmerman did not stay in one place forever, especially not for the meager compensation she could offer. It was late October when Cyrus Garrett made his next move. Lila was in town, purchasing the few supplies she could afford, when Garrett approached her outside the general store. He was a thick-set man in his 50s, with cold gray eyes and the kind of smile that never reached them. "Mrs. Montgomery, what a pleasant surprise," he said, though his tone suggested her presence was anything but. "I have been meaning to speak with you, Mr. Garrett." Lila kept her voice polite but cool. "I am rather busy today, perhaps another time. This will only take a moment." He moved to block her path, not quite threatening but definitely intimidating. "I wanted to make you another offer for your property, a generous one I think you will find. Enough to set you and your children up comfortably somewhere more suitable for a woman on her own. My property is not for sale, Mr. Garrett. I have told you this before." Lila tried to step around him, but he shifted to maintain his blocking position. "Now, Mrs. Montgomery, let us be reasonable. You are struggling to maintain that land. Everyone in town knows it. Why condemn yourself and those children to poverty out of stubborn pride? My offer would solve all your financial problems." "At the cost of my home and my independence," Lila replied sharply. "No thank you, Mr. Garrett. Now please excuse me." "You should reconsider," Garrett said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "A woman alone with children is vulnerable in many ways. Accidents happen, fires break out, cattle wander off. It would be a shame if something unfortunate occurred simply because you were too proud to accept a helping hand." The thinly veiled threat made Lila's blood run cold, but before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Harrison had appeared seemingly from nowhere, his considerable height and breadth making Garrett take an involuntary step backward. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Garrett's eyes narrowed as he assessed this new element. "I do not believe this concerns you, whoever you are." "I am the man who works Mrs. Montgomery's property," Harrison said evenly, "which makes anything concerning her my business, and it sounded to me like you were making threats." "I was making observations about the dangers facing a woman alone," Garrett replied, but his bravado had diminished slightly. "Not that it concerns a hired hand." "Then let me make an observation of my own," Harrison said, stepping closer to Lila in a clearly protective gesture. "Mrs. Montgomery is not alone, and her property is not for sale. I suggest you respect both those facts and keep your distance going forward." Garrett's face flushed with anger, but he was smart enough to recognize that pushing the confrontation further would not serve him well in front of the gathering crowd. Several townspeople had stopped to watch the exchange, and public opinion still mattered, even in rough frontier towns. "This is not over, Mrs. Montgomery," Garrett said coldly. "You would be wise to think very carefully about your situation." He stalked off, and Lila released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Harrison touched her elbow gently, concern evident in his expression. "Are you all right?" "Did he hurt you?" "No, just frightened me," Lila admitted. "He has never been quite so blatant with his threats before." "We need to report this to the sheriff," Harrison said firmly. "The sheriff is Garrett's cousin," Lila replied bitterly. "He will not do anything except perhaps suggest I take Garrett's generous offer." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Then we need to be more vigilant. I do not like this, Lila. Men like Garrett do not make empty threats." "I know." Lila felt exhaustion wash over her. "But what can I do? I will not be driven from my home, from my husband's land. It is all I have to leave my children." "You have more than that," Harrison said quietly. "You have strength, courage, and people who care about you. We will figure this out together." The "we" in that sentence should have made her bristle with independence, but instead it filled her with a warm sense of relief. She was not alone anymore, and that made all the difference. They completed their errands and headed back to the property, both lost in thought. As they approached the house, they could hear children's laughter, and Lila felt her spirits lift slightly. Whatever threats Garrett might make, whatever challenges lay ahead, she had her children safe and happy. That had to count for something. That evening, after the children were in bed, Harrison asked if they could talk. They sat on the new porch he had built, the October air crisp and cool, stars brilliant overhead. "I have been thinking about Garrett and his threats," Harrison began, "and about how to protect you and the children if he decides to escalate." "I have been thinking about the same thing," Lila admitted, "but short of hiring armed guards, which I cannot afford, I do not know what to do." "There might be another option," Harrison said carefully. "One you probably will not like, but hear me out." Lila turned to look at him, curious and cautious. "I am listening. If we were married, Garrett would have a much harder time intimidating you or trying to force you off the land. A married woman with a husband present is far less vulnerable than a widow alone." Harrison spoke quickly, as if trying to get the words out before he lost his nerve. "It would be a practical arrangement for protection and propriety. I would not expect anything beyond what we already have. Separate sleeping arrangements, no demands on you of any kind, just a legal bond that would give you additional security." Lila stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Are you proposing marriage, a marriage of convenience to thwart Cyrus Garrett?" "I am proposing a solution to a practical problem," Harrison said, though his eyes held an intensity that suggested his motivations were not entirely practical. "You need protection and help maintaining your property. I need a place to belong, a family to be part of. We already work well together and the children have accepted me. Why not make it legal?" "Because marriage is not a business transaction," Lila said, her voice rising slightly. "It is a sacred bond between two people who love each other, who choose to build a life together. What you are describing is just a contract. Is it so different from many marriages?" Harrison challenged gently. "Your own marriage, if you do not mind me saying, sounded like it was built more on mutual respect and shared goals than passionate love, and there is nothing wrong with that. Some of the strongest marriages I have seen were partnerships first and love stories second." "Are you suggesting we might fall in love later?" Lila asked, hating how hopeful she sounded. "I am suggesting that what we already have is worth building on," Harrison replied. "Lila, I care about you and your children. More than care about you, if I am being completely honest. I think about you constantly. I find excuses to be near you. When you smile, it makes my entire day better. When you are worried or sad, I feel it like a physical pain. Maybe that is not love yet, but it is something real and worth nurturing." Lila's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. "Harrison, I do not know what to say. This is all so sudden, so unexpected." "Take time to think about it," Harrison said. "I am not asking for an answer tonight, but promise me you will truly consider it, not just dismiss it out of hand because it is unconventional. Think about what is best for you and your children, about what kind of future you want for all of you." "And what about what you want?" Lila asked. "What kind of future do you want, Harrison?" He looked at her for a long moment, his hazel eyes reflecting the starlight. "I want to wake up every morning knowing I am building something that matters. I want to watch your children grow up strong and happy. I want to see this land flourish and become everything it could be. And I want to spend my days beside a woman I admire and respect more than anyone I have ever known. If that woman might someday love me back, that would be more than I ever dreamed possible." Tears slipped down Lila's cheeks, and she did not try to hide them. "You are a remarkable man, Harrison Zimmerman. You deserve someone who can give you her whole heart, not just the broken pieces left after grief. Hearts heal, Lila. And sometimes the broken places make us stronger, more capable of real love because we understand its value." Harrison reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently wiped the tears from her face. "I am not asking you to forget your husband or pretend he never existed. I am asking you to consider the possibility that you might have room in your heart for someone new." His touch was so gentle, so careful, and Lila felt something inside her crack open, some wall she had built to protect herself from feeling too much. She looked at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she had not even known how to articulate, and she felt the terrifying, exhilarating rush of possibility. "I will think about it," she whispered. "I promise I will truly consider what you are offering. That is all I ask." Harrison lowered his hand but remained close, his presence a solid, comforting weight beside her. "Whatever you decide, I am not going anywhere. I meant what I said. This is where I belong, whether you accept my proposal or not." They sat together in companionable silence, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the Colorado wilderness. Lila's mind spun with all the implications of Harrison's proposal, all the practical and emotional considerations. But beneath the chaos of her thoughts ran a single clear truth. She trusted this man, trusted him with her children, with her property, and increasingly with her heart. The question was whether she had the courage to act on that trust, to take the leap of faith that might lead to happiness or heartbreak. Only time would tell, but for the first time since her husband's death, Lila allowed herself to believe that happiness might actually be possible again. The next few days were an agony of indecision for Lila. She found herself watching Harrison constantly, analyzing her feelings, trying to separate practical gratitude from genuine affection. But the more she watched, the more she realized that what she felt went far deeper than gratitude. She noticed how patient he was with Thomas when the toddler insisted on helping with chores that would have been faster to do alone. How he praised Emma for her intelligence and encouraged her to read from the few books they owned. How he let Margaret chatter away without ever showing impatience or dismissiveness. How he treated Samuel as a young man in training rather than a child to be merely tolerated. And she noticed how he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, with an expression that combined longing and tenderness and restraint. He was giving her space to decide, not pressuring or manipulating, just being himself and letting her make up her own mind. One afternoon, while Harrison was out checking the herd of cattle he had helped her purchase with the money from selling some of the handmade quilts she had been crafting in the evenings, Lila sought out Emma. Her eldest daughter had always been perceptive beyond her years, and Lila valued her perspective. "Emma, can we talk for a moment?" Lila asked, finding her daughter helping Margaret with simple arithmetic. Emma nodded and followed her mother to the porch. "Is something wrong, Mama?" "No, nothing is wrong. I just wanted your opinion on something." Lila took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "How would you feel if Harrison became part of our family permanently, if I were to marry him?" Emma's eyes widened, but not with shock. More with a knowing that suggested she had been anticipating this conversation. "Do you love him, Mama?" The directness of the question caught Lila off guard. "I do not know. I care about him very much. He has been wonderful to all of us. But is that enough for marriage?" "Papa used to say that love was a choice as much as a feeling," Emma said thoughtfully. "That you chose to love someone by showing up for them every day, by putting their needs alongside your own, by building something together. Has not Harrison been doing that?" Lila felt tears prick her eyes at her daughter's wisdom. "He has, every single day." "Then maybe love is not something you have to figure out all at once," Emma continued. "Maybe it is something you grow into together. I like Harrison, Mama. He is kind and strong and he makes you smile." "I have not seen you really smile since Papa died, but when Harrison is around you do. That matters." "But I do not want you children to feel like I am replacing your father," Lila said, voicing one of her deepest fears. Emma thought about this seriously before responding. "Papa will always be our papa, Nobody can replace him or make us forget him. But that does not mean we cannot love someone new too. Harrison does not try to be Papa. He is just Harrison, and that is enough. Actually, it is more than enough. It is really good. Lila pulled her daughter into a tight hug. When did you get so wise? I learned from you, Mama, Emma said simply. You taught us that love is big enough to hold lots of people, lots of feelings. You love all four of us differently but completely. Why should it be different with grown-ups? Why indeed? Lila thought about it all through the rest of the day and into the evening. She thought about it while preparing supper, while settling the children for the night, while sitting on the porch watching Harrison close up the barn for the evening. When he walked toward the house, she stood and met him at the bottom of the porch steps. He stopped, reading something in her expression. Lila, is everything all right? Harrison, I have thought about your proposal, she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her racing heart. And I have an answer for you. He stood completely still, barely breathing, waiting. Yes, Lila said simply. I will marry you, not just for protection or propriety, but because I believe we could build something real and good together. Because my children have come to care for you and you for them. Because when I think about the future, I want you in it. Is that enough? The smile that broke across Harrison's face was like sunrise after a long night. That is more than enough. That is everything. He took a step toward her, then hesitated. May I kiss you? I have wanted to since the day I met you, but I did not want to presume. Lila nodded, her heart in her throat. Harrison moved slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, and gently cupped her face in his hands. His kiss was tender and careful, a question as much as a declaration, and Lila felt herself responding, leaning into it, into him, letting herself feel the connection that had been building between them for weeks. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of this gift you are giving me. You already are worthy, Lila whispered. You showed me that the day you arrived. They stood together in the darkness, holding each other, and Lila felt the last pieces of ice around her heart finally melt away. This was not the same love she had shared with her first husband, but it was real and powerful in its own right. It was built on honesty, respect, shared purpose, and a tenderness that took her breath away. We should tell the children, Harrison said eventually. Unless you want to wait, let us tell them now, Lila decided. They should be part of this happiness. They gathered the children in the main room, and Lila let Harrison make the announcement. She watched her children's faces as he explained that he had asked their mother to marry him, and she had said yes, that he would be their stepfather and they would be a real family. Samuel whooped with joy. Emma smiled with quiet satisfaction. Margaret clapped her hands and danced around the room. And Thomas, not entirely understanding but picking up on the general happiness, giggled and reached for Harrison with demanding arms. Harrison picked him up, balancing the toddler easily on his hip, and looked around at all of them. I want you all to know that I consider it the greatest honor of my life to be part of this family. I will never try to replace your papa, but I hope I can be someone you trust and rely on, someone who loves you and your mama with everything I have. Will you still teach me to hunt? Samuel asked, his priorities clearly defined. Absolutely, Harrison assured him with a laugh. Will you still help me with my reading? Emma inquired. Every single day if you want. Will you still let me tell you stories? Margaret demanded. I cannot wait to hear every one of them. And Thomas just patted Harrison's face with his chubby hands and said, Da, in a questioning tone that made everyone's eyes get misty. If you want to call me that, I would be honored, Harrison said softly, but you can call me whatever feels right to you. There is no rush. They spent the rest of the evening making plans. They would marry as soon as the traveling preacher came through town, which should be within the next few weeks. Harrison would move into the house, taking the small room that had been used for storage. They would continue working the land together, building it into something sustainable and profitable. After the children finally settled for the night, their excitement having exhausted them completely, Lila and Harrison sat together on the porch once more. "Are you certain about this?" Harrison asked quietly. "I know it happened quickly. I do not want you to have regrets." "I am certain," Lila replied, surprising herself with how true it was. "For the first time in months, I feel like I am moving towards something instead of just running from the past." "That is because of you, Harrison. You gave me back hope. You gave me a reason to stop running," Harrison countered. "I have spent years avoiding anything permanent, telling myself I did not deserve it after failing my sister and her children. But you and your family, you made me believe I could matter to someone again, that I could build something worthwhile." "We will build it together," Lila said firmly. "That is what marriage is, I think. Not one person saving another, but two people choosing to face life as partners." "I like the sound of that." Harrison reached for her hand and she let him take it, marveling at how natural it felt. Partners, lovers, friends, a real marriage in every sense. The word lovers made Lila blush, suddenly aware of the physical aspect of marriage she had not let herself think too much about. Harrison seemed to sense her hesitation. "We will take everything at whatever pace feels right to you," he said gently. "I meant what I said. I have no demands or expectations. We will figure out our life together as we go." "I know we will," Lila said, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for your patience, your kindness. Thank you for seeing past my defenses to the person underneath." "Thank you for letting me in," Harrison replied. "For trusting me with your heart and your children. I will not take that trust lightly." They sat together long into the night, talking about their pasts, their hopes for the future, the practical details of merging their lives completely. And with each word, each shared confidence, Lila felt the bond between them growing stronger, transforming from possibility into reality. The traveling preacher arrived in Colorado City 3 weeks later, on a crisp November morning that promised the coming winter. Lila wore her best dress, the blue one she had been married in the first time, and Harrison had gotten a proper suit from the general store, spending some of his carefully saved money to look respectable for the occasion. The wedding took place in the small church in town, with a handful of townspeople in attendance. Mrs. Crawford from the general store served as witness, along with her husband. The children stood in the front row, dressed in their Sunday best, watching with solemn attention as their mother and Harrison exchanged vows. "Do you, Harrison Matthew Zimmerman, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Harrison said clearly, his eyes never leaving Lila's face. "And do you, Lila Catherine Montgomery, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" Lila thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the grief and fear and struggle, the unexpected arrival of the man now standing before her. She thought about her children's happiness, about the security and stability Harrison offered, about the growing love she felt blooming in her heart. "I do," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They exchanged simple gold bands that Harrison had purchased, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison's kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise sealed before God and witnesses. The children cheered, and even some of the harder townspeople smiled at the obvious love radiating from the newly married couple. After the ceremony, Mrs. Crawford had prepared a small celebration at her home, with cake and cider and warm wishes. As they walked back to the property that evening, now officially united as a family, Lila felt a peace she had not experienced in over a year. Harrison drove the wagon while she sat beside him, the children in the back chattering about the day's events. "Mrs. Zimmerman," Harrison said with a smile. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Lila admitted, "though it will take some getting used to." When they reached home, Harrison carried a sleepy Thomas inside while the older children scrambled out of the wagon. The evening routine proceeded as normal. Children prepared for bed, prayers said, good nights exchanged. But when the house finally quieted and the children were all asleep, Lila found herself nervous about what came next. Harrison seemed to sense her apprehension. "Would you like some tea?" "We could sit and talk for a while." Lila nodded gratefully, and they settled at the kitchen table with steaming cups. Now that they were alone, officially married, the awareness between them had intensified. "I meant what I said before," Harrison began gently. "There is no rush for anything. We can continue as we have been, taking time to adjust to being married before we change anything else." "You are a patient man, Harrison Zimmerman," Lila said softly. "I am a man who wants his wife to be comfortable and happy," Harrison corrected. "Everything else will come in its own time." But as Lila looked at her husband across the table, at his kind eyes and gentle smile, at the strength and tenderness combined in his very presence, she felt desire stirring, surprising her with its intensity. It had been so long since she had felt this way, since she had allowed herself to want someone. "Harrison," she said quietly, "what if I do not want to wait?" His eyes darkened with immediate understanding and answering desire, but his voice remained careful. "Are you certain?" "I do not want you to feel obligated just because we are married now." "I am not feeling obligated," Lila said, standing and moving around the table to stand before him. "I am feeling like a woman who wants to be close to her husband, if you want the same thing." Harrison stood, his chair scraping back, and looked down at her with an expression that made her knees weak. "I have wanted you since the moment I first saw you, but only if you are truly ready." In answer, Lila reached up and kissed him, not tentatively this time but with genuine passion. Harrison responded immediately, his arms coming around her, pulling her close against his solid chest. The kiss deepened, and Lila felt herself melting into him, all the loneliness and fear of the past months dissolving in the warmth of his embrace. "Bedroom," she murmured against his lips, and Harrison needed no further encouragement. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, awkward in moments as they learned each other's bodies and preferences, but ultimately deeply satisfying. Harrison was attentive and careful, making sure Lila felt cherished and desired. And Lila, letting go of the last vestiges of grief and fear, opened herself to this new love, this new chapter of her life. Afterwards, lying in Harrison's arms in the bed she had once shared with another man, Lila felt no guilt, only gratitude. The past was the past. This was her present and her future, and it was good. "I love you," Harrison whispered into her hair. "I know it is soon to say it, but I do." "I love you, Lila." "I love you too," Lila replied, realizing as she said it that it was absolutely true. "I did not think I could feel this way again, but I do. I love you, Harrison." They held each other through the night, and when Lila finally drifted off to sleep, it was with a smile on her face and peace in her heart. The winter months that followed were both challenging and wonderful. Colorado's winters could be brutal, and this one was no exception, with heavy snows and bitter cold testing the family's resources and resilience. But Harrison had prepared well, stockpiling firewood and supplies, reinforcing the barn and house against the elements. The children adapted quickly to having Harrison as a permanent part of the household. Samuel began calling him Pa within a few weeks, and the others followed suit, though Emma sometimes still called him Harrison when it was just the two of them, and he never corrected her. He understood that each child needed to approach this new relationship in their own way and time. For Lila, marriage to Harrison exceeded her expectations in every way. He was an attentive husband, both in the bedroom and out of it, always making her feel valued and desired. But more than that, he was a true partner, consulting her on decisions about the property, respecting her opinions, sharing the burdens equally. In late December, Cyrus Garrett made one final attempt to acquire the property. He rode up to the house with two of his men, clearly intending to intimidate. But Harrison met him at the fence line, rifle casually held but message clear. "Garrett, I believe Mrs. Zimmerman made it clear her property is not for sale," Harrison said calmly. Garrett's eyes narrowed. "So the hired hand is now the husband. How convenient. Does not change the fact that I want that creek access. Then you will have to want it from a distance because you are not getting it. Now I suggest you turn around and head back to your own land before this becomes unpleasant." For a moment, it seemed like Garrett might push the issue. His hand moved toward his gun and his men tensed. But Harrison did not flinch, did not back down, and something in his steady gaze must have communicated that he was not a man to be trifled with. "This is not over," Garrett muttered, but he turned his horse and rode away, his men following. Harrison watched until they were out of sight, then returned to the house where Lila was waiting anxiously. "Is it settled?" she asked. "For now," Harrison replied. "He is a bully, and bullies back down when they meet real resistance. I do not think he will try anything again, but we will stay vigilant." True to Harrison's prediction, Garrett left them alone after that. Word spread through town that the Montgomery Zimmerman property was under capable protection, and various other predatory elements, who had been circling, also backed off. As winter gave way to spring, the family settled into comfortable routines. Harrison taught Samuel more advanced hunting and tracking skills. He worked with Emma on reading and writing, encouraging her sharp mind. He played elaborate imagination games with Margaret, and he patiently helped Thomas learn to talk, celebrating each new word as a triumph. With Lila, he built a partnership that grew stronger every day. They worked the land together, planting crops and managing livestock. They made decisions about the children together, presenting a united front. And at night, they explored the deepening intimacy of their marriage, finding joy and comfort in each other's arms. In April, Lila discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mix of emotions: joy at the new life, but also concern about adding another mouth to feed when they were still rebuilding financially. When she told Harrison, his reaction was pure, unfiltered delight. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with genuine happiness. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "You are not worried about the expense?" Lila asked. "About the added responsibility, worried. Lila, this is the best news I could imagine. A child of our own, a symbol of what we have built together." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "I am honored, truly honored." The children were equally excited when they learned they would have a new brother or sister. Samuel immediately began planning how he would teach the baby everything he knew. Emma started preparing baby clothes from old fabric. Margaret insisted the baby would be a girl who would want to hear all her stories. Even Thomas seemed to understand something special was happening. As Lila's pregnancy progressed through the summer, Harrison became even more attentive, taking on extra work to spare her, fussing over her health and comfort. She protested that she was not fragile, that she had done this 4 times before, but secretly she loved his care and attention. The property flourished under their joint stewardship. The crops came in abundantly, providing both food for the family and surplus to sell. The small cattle herd grew. Harrison built additional structures, a proper smokehouse, an expanded root cellar, even a small workshop where he could do repairs and build furniture during the winter months. In early December, as the first snows began to fall, Lila went into labor. The midwife from town arrived, along with Mrs. Crawford to help. Harrison paced anxiously outside the bedroom while Emma supervised her younger siblings, keeping them occupied and calm. After several hours of labor, Lila delivered a healthy baby girl with a shock of dark hair and her father's hazel eyes. When Harrison was finally allowed into the room, he approached the bed with reverent steps, staring at his daughter with wonder. "She is perfect," he whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name her?" Lila asked, exhausted but happy. They had discussed names, but Harrison had insisted Lila should make the final choice. Now, looking at her husband's face as he gazed at their daughter, the answer was obvious. "Hope," Lila said. "Her name is Hope, because that is what you gave me, Harrison, hope for the future. Hope that life could be good again. Hope that love could bloom even in the darkest times." Harrison's eyes filled with tears as he carefully took his daughter in his arms. "Hope Zimmerman. It is perfect, just like her, just like you, just like this life we have built." The older children were allowed in to meet their new sister, and the love on their faces as they crowded around to see the baby made Lila's heart overflow. This was her family, not what she had expected, not what she had planned, but perfect in its own way. Over the next few months, as Hope grew and thrived, the family found its new rhythm. Harrison proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with the baby when she fussed at night, changing diapers without complaint, cooing at her in the mornings before starting his workday. Samuel, now 9 and increasingly capable, took on more responsibilities around the property, clearly proud to be contributing in meaningful ways. Emma, at 10, helped with Hope's care while also pursuing her education with the determination Harrison and Lila encouraged. Margaret, 6 years old, entertained the baby with songs and stories. And Thomas, now 3, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to be near her. One evening in early spring, nearly 2 years after Harrison had first arrived on the property, Lila stood on the porch watching her family. Harrison was teaching Samuel how to repair a saddle while Emma read aloud from a book nearby. Margaret and Thomas were playing some elaborate game involving sticks and rocks, and Hope slept peacefully in the basket at Lila's feet, content and safe. Harrison looked up and caught her watching. He smiled, that special smile he reserved just for her, and she felt the now familiar warmth spread through her chest. This man, who had appeared when she needed him most, had become the center of her world in ways she could never have imagined that first day when he rode up asking for work. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Harrison and Lila sat together on the porch as had become their custom. The spring air was mild and sweet, full of promise. "You ever regret it?" Lila asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of continuing to drift? You could have seen so much more of the world, had adventures, been free." Harrison pulled her closer against his side. "I have everything I want right here. Adventure is overrated when you have a home to come back to, and freedom means nothing if you have no one to share it with. You and the children, this property, this life we have built, it is more than I ever dreamed possible." "I looked at you that first day," Lila said softly, "when you looked at my 4 children and said you had always thought you wanted a large family, and I thought you were either crazy or lying." I could not imagine anyone voluntarily taking on the chaos and responsibility I was drowning in. And now, Harrison prompted, now I understand that you were telling the truth. You really did want this. You saw past the struggle to the possibility, past the burden to the gift. You saw what we could become together. Lila turned in his arms to look up at him. You saved us, Harrison, not just financially or practically, but in every way that matters. You saved me from drowning in grief. You saved my children from growing up in bitterness and fear. You saved this property from being lost. You saved our family. We saved each other, Harrison corrected gently. You gave me a reason to stop running from my past. You gave me a family to love and protect. You gave me purpose and meaning. Without you, I would still be drifting from job to job, never belonging anywhere, never mattering to anyone. You made me matter, Lila. You made me whole. They kissed, and it was filled with all the love and gratitude and commitment they felt for each other. When they finally pulled apart, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. I have been thinking, he said quietly, about maybe expanding the house. We are getting a bit crowded with 6 of us, and if we have more children, Lila interrupted with a laugh. 5 is not enough for you. I would not mind 1 or 2 more, Harrison admitted with a grin. I told you I always wanted a large family. Besides, you are so beautiful when you are pregnant. Lila swatted his arm playfully, but she could not deny the flutter of joy at the thought. 2 years ago, she had been certain her life was effectively over, that all she had to look forward to was struggle and survival. Now she was contemplating having more children, expanding her home, building an even bigger future. Let us see how we manage with the 5 we have before we start planning for more, she said practically. But her smile gave away her true feelings. As the months continued to pass, the Montgomery Zimmerman property became known throughout the region as one of the most well-maintained and productive homesteads in the area. Harrison's hard work and expertise, combined with Lila's practical management and determination, created something truly special. They added dairy cows to their operation, and Lila began making cheese and butter to sell in town. Harrison built additional fencing and acquired more grazing land through purchase and trade. The vegetable garden expanded into a full market garden, providing fresh produce to townspeople who had neither the space nor the skill to grow their own. Samuel became his stepfather's right hand, learning ranching and farming with dedication and skill. Emma discovered a gift for numbers and began keeping the household accounts, her careful records helping them make smarter financial decisions. Margaret's vivid imagination found outlet in helping her mother design and create beautiful quilts that commanded premium prices. Even young Thomas contributed by collecting eggs and feeding chickens, taking his responsibilities seriously. And Hope, growing quickly as toddlers do, was the darling of the entire family, doted on by everyone but never spoiled. Harrison, who had thought he could not love any of the children more than he loved the first 4, found his heart expanding to accommodate this new person he and Lila had created together. In the fall of their 3rd year together, Lila discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was no anxiety, only joy. They were financially stable now, the property was thriving, and another child felt like a blessing rather than a burden. Their 2nd child together, a boy they named Joshua after Harrison's father, arrived the following summer. With dark hair like his mother and his father's strong build already evident, Joshua was welcomed with open arms into the loving, chaotic, wonderful family they had created. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and failed crops, injuries and illnesses. But there were also weddings when the older children grew up and found partners of their own, grandchildren who filled the house with new laughter. Harvests so abundant they had to expand the barn to hold it all. Through everything, Harrison and Lila remained partners in the truest sense, facing each challenge together, celebrating each victory as a shared accomplishment. Their love, which had begun as a practical arrangement and grown into genuine affection, deepened into something profound and unshakable. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harrison gave Lila a locket containing a photograph of all their children, the 4 she had brought to their marriage and the 3 they had created together. 7, he said with a satisfied smile. I got my large family after all. You did indeed, Lila agreed, opening the locket to look at the beloved faces. And you have been a wonderful father to every single one of them. Because I had a wonderful partner showing me how, Harrison replied. Everything good in my life, everything that matters, started the day I rode onto this property and saw you scrubbing that floor with 4 children playing nearby. I looked at your children and said I had always thought I wanted a large family, and you gave me that and so much more. We gave each other everything, Lila corrected. That is what real partnership is, Harrison. Not one person saving another, but 2 people choosing every day to build something beautiful together. They stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in shades of orange and gold. Around them, the property they had built together stretched in every direction, fields of grain, grazing cattle, gardens bursting with vegetables, outbuildings they had constructed with their own hands. But more important than any physical structure was the love that filled this place. Love between husband and wife, love between parents and children, love that had grown from the ashes of grief into something stronger and more beautiful than either of them had thought possible. Harrison pulled Lila close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. This man, who had appeared in her life when she most needed him, had become her partner, her love, her home, and she had become the same for him. From inside the house, they could hear their children laughing. Samuel, now 17 and nearly grown, teasing Emma about a boy who had been paying her attention in town. Margaret singing to baby Joshua while Hope played with her corn-husk dolls. Thomas, 6 years old now, pestering anyone who would listen about learning to ride the new horse Harrison had just purchased. This was their life. Messy and loud and chaotic and absolutely perfect. This was the family Harrison had dreamed of, the future Lila had thought impossible. This was home. I love you, Lila whispered, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them. I love you too, Harrison replied, kissing the top of her head. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that. Thank you for letting me stay, Lila. Thank you for giving me a family, a purpose, a reason to believe that good things were still possible. Thank you for everything. Thank you for seeing us that day, Lila said, for looking at my 4 children and seeing possibility instead of burden. For being brave enough to stay when every practical reason said you should go. For loving us when we desperately needed to be loved. They stood together as darkness fell and the first stars appeared, comfortable in their silence, content in their togetherness. Behind them, the house glowed with lamplight and rang with the voices of their children. Before them, the land they had built together stretched into the night, solid and real and theirs. This was their happy ending, but more than that, it was their happy beginning. Because every day they woke up together was another chance to choose love, to choose partnership, to choose family. And Harrison and Lila chose it gladly, over and over again, building a life that honored both the past they had survived and the future they were creating together. In the years that followed, as their children grew and had children of their own, as the property expanded and prospered, as Colorado changed and developed around them. Harrison and Lila remained the steady center of it all. Their love story, which had begun with a desperate widow and a wandering cowboy, became the foundation for generations of family stories, a testament to the power of hope, trust, and taking chances on love. And whenever their grandchildren asked how they had found each other, Harrison would smile that special smile and say, "I looked at your grandmother's 4 children and said I had always thought I wanted a large family. Turned out, I had no idea how right I was." Lila would laugh and add, "And I took a chance on a stranger who showed up asking for work. Best decision I ever made." Because that is what love stories are in the end. They are about chances taken and trust given, about choosing to believe in possibility when all evidence suggests defeat. They are about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, simply by opening their hearts to each other. Harrison and Lila's story was one of those stories. It was not perfect or without struggle, but it was real and true and lasting. It was a love built on friendship and respect, on shared work and shared dreams, on laughter and tears and everything in between. It was, in every sense that mattered, a love worth having. And they were grateful for it every single day of their long, happy lives together. The end.